My guest on this episode of the Neil Wilkins podcast is Phil Treagus-Evans. Now, Phil is the CEO and co-founder of Giraffe Social, a human-first marketing agency challenging the traditional agency model. No hard feat, that one. Anyway, he is also the best-selling author of Human First Marketing, The Art of Being Seen, Trusted, and Remembered. And if you are in marketing or running business, you will know that actually human-centric marketing works. Or does it? Have you been sucked into the trap of technology, of AI, of not actually connecting as a real person in a digital world? Because Phil really truly believes, as we're going to hear, that often we forget we're human. Phil, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Neil. That was quite the intro. I appreciate it.
Well, it was quite the intro because you're touching on a topic that is, well, I guess probably one of the most profound topics of our age, really. We've got AI emerging, which is something so fundamentally groundbreaking that it's untrue. And I think all of us really, in many ways, are trying to get our head around this. You know, we've come out of an age of social media where actually the word social is a bit of a misnomer because it's now an ad channel for most brands and companies. We've really lost our way, haven't we?
Yeah, I think you could say that. I talk in the book a little bit about how if you go far enough back, you know, if you spoke to your grandparents, for example, they probably knew the name of their butcher and the person who ran the shop and all of the businesses that they interacted with on a day-to-day sort of weekly basis. They would know the people behind that business. Whereas these days, I think that's not that common. You know, even though we're obviously told to shop local, I think a lot of businesses now, because of just the sheer amount of data that we see as marketers, and obviously all of the technology and the tools that we have so readily available, it's easy to forget that actually we're speaking to humans. We are humans. You know, businesses are just a group of humans trying to provide value to another group of humans, and somewhere along the way I think we've lost that a little bit.
So I'm going to challenge here, and this is challenging not just every marketer or business owner listening or watching this. I'm looking in the mirror at the same time because I think that's only appropriate. And I'm going to say we've all become lazy because it's just been too easy. I mean, we can schedule posts in socials. We can get AI to write our latest blog. We don't actually have to talk to customers because we can schedule all of that stuff to be automated and kind of going out whilst we're sleeping. I think we've become lazy. I think we've kind of almost taken it upon ourselves to bask in the luxury that is scaling through technology. And almost we use that as an excuse when it comes to growing our businesses. There, he said it. Would you agree?
I would. Yeah, it's funny you use the word lazy because I was having a conversation the other day about AI, and I sort of said, you know, I'm not anti-AI, I'm anti-lazy AI. I think if you're using AI and technology to do exactly what you just said, scale everything up and really adopt a quantity over quality approach, I'm against that. I think, you know, there's lots of uses of AI, there's lots of uses of technology that allow us to enhance humanity and enhance the connection that we form with our customers. And sadly, I think too often we tend to go the other way with it.
Do you think it's a case of, you know, once we see maybe a little bit of success with that kind of thing, then we think, oh, now I've got to double down on that, rather than taking that time saved or taking that particular task that, you know, used to be admin, we don't need to do it because the technology is now doing it for us. And then rather than taking that time and thinking, okay, I can now up the value of that piece of time because I can actually go and now talk to a client and give even more value, or maybe go and serve somebody else. We've actually thought, no, I'm going to double down on that because if I can double it, I can now triple it and I can now quadruple it. We're getting sort of almost blindsided by our success.
Yeah, I think it's a slippery slope. And yeah, you know, there's no doubting the fact that you can generate results through that sort of approach. But I would say that they're very short-termist and sort of quite surface. I talk a lot in the book about how I think as marketers, we should be thinking a lot more about lifetime customer value, building brand advocates, than we should around short-term results. How can we get a sale today? I think in the long term, I think we're going to struggle because of that, and I think that's going to be even more the case as AI, continues to take a stranglehold on how we market to our customers.
I'm always interested in almost taking a little bit of a barometer kind of approach to this, and just sort of sensing in all my conversations, really, both in terms of people who are working at a junior level. They might be, either first role, or they might be doing a marketing apprenticeship, for example, all the way through to the most experienced CMOs of our world, and just kind of get a real sense of, do we think that actually AI is going to make all of this worse, or actually we're going to figure it out and it's going to make things better? I guess the word is hope. Do you have hope that we might get this right?
Yeah, I think I'm an optimist at heart, so I always have hope. I think with AI, the scariest thing about it is it's just unknown. This is completely unprecedented, and it's growing at such a fast rate that trying to keep up with it is, it's almost impossible. So do I have hope? Yes, I do have hope, but I do think there's an opportunity, and my hope comes from that rather than from what I think we can do with AI, because I think as marketers at any level, as you say, you should be looking at how much AI is being used for marketing content and see it as an opportunity, because I think we're heading towards a homogenization of content where everything starts sounding the same, everything starts to sort of feel the same. And that's a big opportunity for marketers, because if everyone else is being, to use your word, a bit lazy with how they use these tools, then the people who take the time to actually create something meaningful and to try and provide value to their audience and connect with them as people, I think it's a big opportunity. And that's one of the big motivators behind the book, is to highlight that to people that, hey, this is a chance to stand out. This is a point of differentiation that no one can replicate. Your people in your company and your customers, that's completely custom to you, and that should be celebrated.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because as you were describing that, Phil, I just kind of remembered back to some of the early courses that I did. So we're going back a couple of decades now, where I can just feel myself standing at the front of the group and just kind of almost saying that this people thing is your differentiator, because you can get your same products and services from a competitor down the road, but you can't get and you can't replicate that group of individuals that you've got. It's so interesting to really hear that coming back at me again now, say 20 odd years later, where actually it's become even more pertinent now. It's become a real truth that, that is the one thing that you can still trade in. That is the one thing where you can differentiate. And, this works in B2B marketing. It works in business to consumer. It's just everywhere, isn't it? It's that personal angle that people are curious about, aren't they? Because your customers are curious. They don't want to just be buying a product or service. They want to know so much more about your beliefs, your values, your sustainable carbon footprint, your sustainability kind of mission or ethos. That's the real kind of heart of this, isn't it? It is from the heart.
Yeah. So the three sort of core reasons that I think marketing isn't working as well as it was, one of them is AI, as we've touched on. Another is the sheer quantity of ads that we are faced with every single day. And the third is something you just touched on, which is a heightened consciousness in customers in terms of making purchasing decisions, who they align themselves with, thinking about who are the people behind this brand, how do they treat their staff, where are their suppliers from, how are they supported, what ingredients are in this food, how many chemicals are in this food, what's the packaging of this thing I'm buying. Like, there's so many things that people are now a lot more focused on. And I think if you're not careful with your marketing and you start to give people that sniff of, this is automated, this is ChatGPT have just sort of spat this out, it means that your customers might start to think, well, where else are they skimping in their business? Where else are they kind of opting for this, quantity over quality approach. And it could sort of end up having quite a negative impact on your business, I think.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because whilst you and I are, I think, very clear in our view on this, I mean, we're not necessarily sharing an opinion that's widely held, because I think there are still a lot of commentators, and some in very significant influencer kind of roles. And I'm thinking of people like Gary Vee, for example, and there are others, of his ilk, who are saying, oh no, this is now, you can go at scale. Now, I'm not just talking 90 posts a day, you can go 500 posts a day, and you can absolutely blanket coverage and almost block out the competition. It's a hard one to kind of push against, isn't it? And sometimes, I guess, a bit like the sustainability story, you kind of feel maybe at times as though you're trying to push water uphill, because the other option is so much easier. Having to kind of be open and honest about your people, your culture, what you stand for, and actually tell your authentic human story takes time and energy. Oh, but I don't really want to be doing that because I can just do an automated post. That's much easier. I'm a marketer. Is the kind of the thing that we're up against here. It's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, and it does sometimes feel like you're fighting a losing battle, especially with key voices in our industry like Gary Vee. And I have a lot of respect for Gary Vee, and I think he does a lot of things that I think you could argue are human first, in terms of how much he's developed his personal brand and, his agency VaynerMedia. If you go to their website, Gary Vee's everywhere. You can see him all over it. So, there are elements to his brand which are human first. But I would say with him, when he first burst on the scene with his kind of document everything style of social, it was new and it was different, and it was, wow, who's this guy who's just completely showing us everything in his business and being so unconditionally candid with everything he's saying. But I would argue that now, and maybe because of his influence, that's quite common. I think there's lots of businesses that are super founder led and super transparent about everything they're doing. And I think there are positives to that, but the difficulty comes to that point where, posting 10 times a day isn't enough, and you have to post 20 and you have to post 30. At some point, the quality will dip. I mean, I think that's just inevitable. So, yeah, I'm in an industry that I would argue is one of the hardest to stand out. Every agency sounds the same, and I always say this to prospective clients, that I don't envy anyone having to pick an agency, because they all have the same selling points. Oh, we're creative and we're strategic, and we've done this and we've done that, and it's hard to separate yourself. And Human First was kind of our moment, because we looked at what we were seeing in the industry, and we were seeing these patterns of actually marketing where people are front and center are outperforming everything else, whether that's influencer marketing, whether that's employee advocacy, whether it's like founder-led content. We do a lot of work with brands supporting their executive teams and helping them develop their LinkedIn presence. And the commonality between all of it was people. And we thought, oh, that's interesting. And the more we lent into it, the better the results got. And that is sort of spiraled from there, really. And then, ends up writing a book. Got a bit carried away.
I know, and it's often that's where the inspiration, or the best inspiration, comes from, isn't it? Is where you're living it, you're kind of living it and breathing it, and you just know it's the truth, where it's your truth, and it kind of, you just get a sense of, look, there's the evidence, because I'm seeing people's reactions to it, they're getting it, they're understanding it, so I now need to share it. And it must just be so positive in terms of that journey that you've been on through actually doing the writing.
Yeah, definitely, and I deliberately thought I need to practice what I preach here, and I was extremely transparent throughout the whole process. So I was sharing on LinkedIn pretty much every week how many words into the book I am, what I'm writing about, what I'm struggling with, lots of healthy doses of imposter syndrome along the way. And it's been great, because firstly, people were so supportive and understanding and, really cheering me on, which was great motivation. But it also translated to when the book came out, there was lots of people who felt like they had a role in the book, whether it was commenting on a post or speaking to me about it. I think that was one of the reasons it did so well when it first came out.
So actually practicing what you preach there with the human actually is part of it, getting that human feedback, not just
Exactly.
an AI kind of proofreading it for you, actually getting it from humans.
It was all proofread by real humans.
It's almost like it had to be, because without that, I mean, it wasn't going to hold true, was it, to be fair?
Yeah, I didn't really have much choice, did I? I don't think I could bring out a book called Human First that was completely proofread by AI. I actually built a cohort of early readers, so a mixture of CMOs from some quite big companies to other agency founders to my co-founder, even one of my teachers from college who put their hand up and said, I'd like to read it, which gave me some PTSD when they were sort of, putting red mark all over it and correcting everything. So yeah, it was sort of proofread by people as I was writing it to basically fact check me, to sort of point fingers and say, well, is this true? And challenge me on things and make me question myself. And undoubtedly that made it a much better book. There's no doubt about it.
So, I mean, just kind of going through the book, really. I mean, it's obviously something that I think is, as we said, is quite a profound timing that you're bringing it to the world at this time where we all do need to be reflecting at whatever level, whatever kind of role that we have. What were the original or kind of initial sort of pain points, I guess you could say, that you were trying to resolve? I know one of the things was traditional marketing funnels was one of the areas that you, I guess, had some issues with, that you thought, we've actually, again, lost it in this particular place. What are the problems that you identified there?
Yeah, this is one of the more contentious parts of the book that people seem to focus on, is my sort of hatred of funnels. And I think there's a few things. I think one of the main ones is that the modern consumer journey is not linear. It isn't awareness, consideration, conversion. People bounce all over the place. There's so much marketing. There's so many different forms of media that we consume, that the chances of someone having that sort of hop, skip, jump through the linear funnel stages, I mean, it just doesn't really happen anymore. So I think when you're developing a marketing strategy that's based around, a concept that isn't really true anymore, I think that's already a bit of an issue. Another issue is that the sort of design of the funnel almost assumes like a gravitational pull. You have awareness at the top, and there's this like idea of there's gravity, and people are just falling through your funnel. And the reality is the opposite. I think there was a statistic, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but about how many people pay money for ad blockers. There are people who are proactively trying to resist marketing. So this sort of concept of it, or people just come in through the top and they fall through your funnel. Again, it's not really accurate. And then the final thing is that some funnels, and I'm sure there's people listening to us shouting at the podcast, some funnels don't include an advocacy stage, and the ones that do, it often feels like an afterthought, something tagged on to say, oh yeah, and we'll look after our customers and blah 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 blah. But human first marketing, advocacy is what we're aiming for, more than just conversions. Like we are aiming to build brand advocates, people who buy every product that you release, people who tell people at the bus stop about the thing that you've just done and the thing you've just brought out. And for me, the sort of old style funnel doesn't really address that as it should, doesn't place as much emphasis on it should. So yeah, I don't know if you want me to dive into my alternative solution. Might be a bit of a rabbit hole.
That was going to be my next question, because I think, well, okay then, Phil, if you're challenging the way that 99% of marketers have been doing it, myself included, and I've been advocating it as a concept, and I call it customer journey, which possibly is a little bit more in line with your approach. But okay, it's a funnel. Funnels are funnels. Yeah, I'd be very interested to know the alternative.
Sure. Yeah. So I call it the pinball method, and it's based on the idea that the modern consumer journey is chaotic, and they bounce around different stages, and they're not going to go through it in a linear fashion. if you picture a funnel, essentially what I've done is flipped it onto its head so that awareness is at the bottom. Consideration I've replaced with engagement, because I think consideration, conversion are both somewhat salesy, and I think that in a 3-step funnel, that's now 2/3 of the funnel that's focused on selling you something. So I've replaced consideration with engagement, and I think there it's more about building trust, having conversations, building relationships. Then you have conversion, and then you have advocacy at the top. And the way it works is that rather than having these linear steps, we install what I call marketing boosters at each stage, and their goal is to try and keep the customer in play in your pinball strategy, where they're naturally going to fall down because they don't want to be marketed to. We put things in place that keep them engaged and keep them bouncing up the pinball machine. So it's I'm not reinventing the wheel here. It's not something completely brand new, but it's something that we use at Giraffe, and it's something that we've seen work. And even just from a conceptual practice, I think thinking about the customer journey in that way and having acceptance of, they're not going to go, 1 step, 2 step, 3 step. Oh, that's done. It doesn't work like that. And I think thinking about that in that way when you're planning how you're going to do your marketing, I think is beneficial.
The thing that I'm really, really enjoying, I think, about this is this whole idea of, if you don't do a pinball approach, then there's a very high likelihood, irrespective of your product or your industry or whatever your legacy marketing has been doing, there's a very, very big danger at any step in the journey, to use the word generically there, in the journey, that this potential customer, so at this stage, early stage, they're a prospects, they haven't actually committed to you yet, that they are going to go and consider alternatives. So they're going to be looking at your competition. They might decide, actually, I don't want to spend the money anyway, or we get tied up, or we get distracted, or we're off track. Whereas actually, this kind of concept of pinball, this constantly serving them with little drip-fed moments, I guess, moments of experience, moments of value, constantly keeps them moving upwards. And so as you're playing the little pinball thing, and I'm using my fingers here to play pinball just as I'm talking here, so it shows how much it's resonating with me. But they're constantly, this little ball is just bouncing higher and higher and higher, rather than just, as you say, putting it in at the top and then being just a giant assumption. Oh yes, well 90% of people are going to follow all the way through and they're going to convert. Well, they're not. It just simply doesn't work like that. And then do you think, where we've become lazy because we think, well, we're marketers, we're business owners, we're making these decisions, they will come, they will buy because our stuff's really great, but the only person who thinks it's great is us. Whereas the customer's actually looking elsewhere and critiquing us. And unless we provide that drip feeding of value constantly, that little pinball is just going to fall out the bottom again, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's, we talked about earlier about, it's harder than ever to have a USP, even for, product-based businesses. There's usually not that much difference between products. So often people now are buying based on how a brand makes them feel, the experience that they get from that brand, what that brand says about them as well. I think there's an element of aligning ourselves with brands. And that's why this method works, because you're not just thinking about, well, how can we get a sale? How quickly can we get someone from not knowing about us to buying the product? And then that's tick, done, next one. And with this, it's less like that. It's more about, well, how do we build a community? How do we build advocates, people who like the brand, people who respect what we do, and people who feel like they have some sort of relationship to the brand because of conversations they've had with us on social, or they saw the founder on a podcast and enjoyed what they had to say, or there's so many other ways of doing it. And that comes back to what we talked about earlier, that's how you generate lifetime customers, rather than one-off sales and then just skipping on to the next one, which I get it. I get that model, but for me, I think business has an opportunity and marketers have an opportunity to make the world better. And I know that sounds like, my Miss Universe speech, but I do think that's the case. And one of the big motivators behind writing the book was that marketing feels like a dirty profession sometimes. I talk about Bill Hicks, the comedian, and how he refers to marketers as Satan's little helpers. Uh, and I think there's an element of that where you feel almost a bit guilty about, well, my job is to make people buy things, and I have to try and think about psychology. And I think on the darker side of marketing there's manipulation. And so I'm all about, well, how can we use marketing to actually make people's lives better, so that they have a more positive connotation of marketing, and as a result, a more positive relationship with your brand. So yeah, I think it's the direction that we need to go as marketers. Whether everyone will or not, I'm not sure, but obviously that's the goal of the book, is to try and convince people that it's not only the right thing to do, but it's also the most commercially effective thing to do as well, long term.
Is that where your empath framework comes into play? Because again, I guess it's kind of part of within the funnel. It's this whole thing about the value that we've been talking about, the experience that we've been saying, and kind of, really, I guess, actively listening to customer at any point in that pinball kind of experience. It's kind of saying, okay, we're properly empathic here. We're actually listening. We're going to respond, and we're going to is it almost to the point of one-to-one communication, that real personalization opportunity?
Yeah, I think there's definitely an element of that. Obviously, it depends on the business and the scale of the business and how many customers you have. But I can use Giraffe as an example. Our company year runs to the end of May, so we've just been in the process of renewing everything. And one of the things that we've just finished doing is completely refreshing our marketing strategy. And I think when it comes to the understanding your customer part of a strategy, too often I think businesses make assumptions. I think they generalize their customers into sort of customer avatars that are based on assumptions and demographics. And I think that the danger there is that you're not really understanding your customer. You're trying to create a Venn diagram where you go, well, most of them fit into this generalized sort of area. But to be able to sort of do marketing that really resonates and connects, you have to understand your customers on a deeper level, on a more emotional level, and how they make decisions and how they feel about your industry. And so as part of Giraffe's marketing strategy, I've made it a point to get on the phone with a bunch of our customers and say, can you cast your mind back to when you picked Giraffe? What did that search look like? Where did you start when you thought, I needed an agency? Where did you go? What did you do? What were you looking for when you hit the website? What were the markers that gave you that trust that, okay, they're the right agency? And profound. Like some of the answers you think, God, I didn't even think about that. And you get into the frustrations that people go through when they're looking for an agency and how it feels. And I'm going on another call with an agency and they're going to say the exact same thing the other one just said, and hearing that sometimes isn't the easiest thing to hear, but so helpful. If you take it on board and you start really thinking about how your customer feels when they're making a purchase, it's the most powerful thing you can do in terms of lining your marketing with that emotional state.
Which is obviously it's one that if you're in business to consumer B2C and maybe you've got a consumer product that is quite evocative and it is something that is, I guess, traditionally an emotional decision, that's one thing. Does this apply though in say a B2B world? I mean, I've got clients and I've had other clients as well in more kind of industrial sectors where it's like, oh no, we're an old school kind of industry. We've been going for like 6,000 years. And it's kind of, we're very traditional, we don't really do digital and we don't really understand all that stuff, and it's all about the relationship, but it's about price and all this stuff. Does it apply in that industry as well, those kinds of industries as well?
I would argue it applies even more. I think with those people are still feeling something, whether it's a case of wanting to protect the sentimental, like, oh, I'm old school and I do things a certain way. And I think we've all encountered those people. And so they're probably feeling a little bit, I don't know, apprehensive about, this is new. This is something I don't really understand. I'm sort of trusting this person because it's not an area that I'm familiar with, so I'm having to, like you say, pick someone based on relationship and trust. Knowing that, I mean, that's hugely powerful. If they're looking to hire a company and they speak to 3 different companies, and one just completely gets that dynamic and really takes the time to explain it and to develop a relationship and to speak to them on a level that they get and they understand and it resonates with them, whereas the other 2 just say, this is what we do, blah blah blah, and they just whiz through it, and the person thinks, I don't really understand what that is or why that's important or what it means for me and my business. That the one that connects is the one that's gonna win. So yeah, I would argue it's even more important in those situations.
And is this the trust that you talk about in the book? You've said that we're working and living in a very skeptical world. Nobody really believes anything anymore. We've had fake news. We've got sort of deep fake stuff now digitally. Yeah. There's a lot of kind of, I guess, uncertainty in there, isn't there? Whereas if you're taking this kind of an approach or using this kind of a model, it just inherently is going to be building trust, isn't it? Because you see an authentic human relationship developing, from the provider to the client, or the seller to the customer. And it feels like that is what both the world needs as well as the customer needing it. This is really important, isn't it? At the heart of pretty much everything we do as marketers or business owners.
Yeah, I think trust is difficult because it's a metric that, how do you measure that? But I think it's already one of the most important, metrics, currencies, whatever you want to call it. But I think over the next few years, as AI develops, it's going to become even more important. And I talk about in the book that we are starting as marketers from a trust deficit. The days of trust is there to be lost, they're gone. We start from a deficit, and our marketing and how we communicate to our customers has to rebuild trust, because that's where we're starting from. People will have lower trust in companies than they have for a very long time. The same's true of like government, the same's true of CEOs and people who are successful. Is that the trust just isn't there. And I think as we continue to go down a road where, like you say, there's deep fakes and you don't know if something's real or not, that's only going to deepen and get worse. So every marketer should be thinking about this. When they're doing a strategy, they should be asking themselves the question, how do I earn the trust? How do I earn the trust of my customers? And it isn't going to be by forcing them through a funnel that is desperate to sell them something. It's going to be about relationships. It's going to be about forming connections, showing credibility, being consistent. Those are the things that I personally think that as marketers we should be focusing on.
And so that showing credibility then is that very much about evidence base. So it's almost, again, as a marketer, you need to be collecting and collating evidence of good experience, of great results, of amazing outcomes. It would feel that becomes almost then the new currency, doesn't it? Rather than just, we sold this amount of revenue this month. It's much more about, well, equally so, probably it is about but look, this is how much advocacy we attained. This is how many positive reviews we've had. Here's our net promoter score, customer satisfaction, for those of you who are using that. It's those kinds of things that come into play here, isn't it? To kind of really give that evidence that says, okay, we're not just talking a good story, we're actually demonstrating a good story. Because without it, the trust wouldn't exist, would it?
Yeah, and I think it's hard to measure this stuff. And I talk in the book about engagement being maybe one of the most important metrics of the modern day. When we're doing our sort of social media strategies, we're always kind of thinking, well, how do we engage the audience? It's one thing to be seen, it's one thing to maybe get a click or a sale, but to have a conversation and to have a meaningful back and forth with a customer, we think is one of the most important things that we should be looking at as marketers. But I also think we should be generating sales. I try and be as clear about that in the book as possible, that, I'm not, out there being like, we should be measuring vibes and, we completely forget revenue and profit and trying to, I run a business myself, so I understand the importance of being profitable and generating revenue and growing. And this isn't let's forget about that, but this is I think there's a longer game to be played, and I think that the companies that play it will ultimately be the brands that win tomorrow. Yeah.
Longer game. Yes, I'm hearing this a lot at the moment. It just feels in these moments of uncertainty and fear and kind of tariffs and whatever else, there's a lot of stuff going on, isn't there? But I think those people and strategies that are focused on that longer game, they can ride out those little short-term cycles and those little moments of chaos and confusion, which is really, I guess, what this is a lot about. What would be the next steps, having heard this? And we'll give obviously links to your book and stuff in the description, so everybody can get a hold of a copy here, because they'll want to go deeper into this, I am sure. So we'll make sure that's readily available. But just thinking, what would the next steps be? Because we've talked kind of philosophically about many of the things that are facing sort of marketers and business owners right now. But in terms of practical steps, what would you say somebody would be able to do or could be doing as a very next step? The first thing, maybe a bit later today, if they had to do one thing, what would that be?
I think the easiest first step is to look at your marketing and see how many faces there are. When you're putting out content on social, is there a picture of you with it? Is there a picture of your team? Or are you using stock imagery, or dare I say AI generated imagery where everyone's got 6 fingers? Let's start there. How do we get our team into our marketing? Whether that's getting your team to post something, whether it's about sticking a post on LinkedIn to celebrate a member of your team that's been in the company for a year now, or these sorts of things. And then the same is true for customers as well. You ask the question, how can I involve my customers in my marketing? Whether that's that they're actually collaborating and creating content through sort of user-generated content, or maybe it's just a case of sharing a particularly awesome review or testimonial and asking them if they'd be happy for you to put a photo of them with it, or even get them to do a video review. That would be the first step, is how do I get more people, real people, into my marketing that people can see?
And they're kind of almost coming full circle, is the human-centric marketing, is involve your customers, your loyal advocates in your marketing, because they are part of your marketing. And then it's almost then that becomes the marketing, because they're out marketing for you and with you. It's exciting. Exactly. And this kind of just, changes the game. And again, as you say, as we come kind of full circle in this, brings us back to the fact that we, no matter what products or services we have, we are here to serve. This is the point of what we do and why we're here. So, I'm really heartened by this. I think the word hope definitely rings true here. I think we can all have absolutely hope. Yeah. So where can people get hold of a copy of your book, Phil?
It's available on Amazon as a ebook and as a paperback. I keep getting asked about audiobooks as well. So again, I think because it's human first, I've sort of backed myself into a corner where it's probably me who has to read the book for the audiobook. So we're still waiting on that. But it's available on Amazon. So go get it and let me know what you think. I really want to hear people's opinions on it, and the reception's been awesome so far.
Wonderful. So we'll put, as I said earlier, all the links, everyone, you can see in the description below to get hold of Phil's book and connect with Phil as well. And keep in touch and provide that feedback. And Giraffe Social will be the link in there to connect with Phil's agency too. This has been a really great conversation, Phil. Really appreciate it. And I wish you every success with getting the book out to the widest possible audience.
Thanks, Neil. It was a pleasure.